So the first part of this, actually, I'm going to turn this down a little bit because I was listening to it last night, and I was like, wow, it like blew me out of the water. So I'm going to turn it down a little bit. So we'll see. We'll see if that sounds any better. Okay. So here we go. Section 1.3, we did the distance formula first. Now we're going to do a thing called the midpoint formula. Oops, I'll spell the whole thing out. Midpoint formula. Now these problems kind of look like they're the same. When you look in the book, or if you see them on a quiz, they might be right next to each other. It kind of looks like they're the same problem because they give you the ordered pairs. You know how all those problems where they had the ordered pairs, you had to find the distance between the two ordered pairs. The problems on this kind of look the same as well, except you're finding something completely different. You're not finding out how long the line is. You're finding out the point that's in the, what? Middle. Yeah. Now, in geometry, we normally don't say in the middle, though. Okay? We just say at the midpoint. So, I don't know, let's just eyeball this. I'm not going to measure it, but if we eyeballed it, where do you think the middle is? About right in here? To the left a little more? Okay. Watch this. This is cool. I can move it over. Tell me when. When? Okay. All right. So we'll say that that is the midpoint. All right. So let's go to McDonald's again down the highway. Remember that from yesterday? So let's say we're at. We'll make this kind of easy. Let's say we're at the 10 and the 50. Okay. So here we go. This is the 10-mile marker. This is the 50-mile marker. Let's say. Now, what's the distance between those two? 40 miles. Let's say we wanted to meet somebody, but we didn't want to travel all 40 miles to get to their place, and they didn't have to go anywhere, right? Let's say you wanted to meet somewhere in the middle. Say McDonald's is right in the middle, but you didn't want to drive 40 miles there, but you could meet 20 miles, okay? All right, so that's what we want to do. We want to meet right here. So we want to find out what mile marker are we going to meet at? All right, that's the middle. Okay, that's the mid what? Point, okay? The midpoint means there's just as much distance to one side as there is the other side. Everybody, that makes sense, doesn't it? It's the midpoint. So we don't really say middle too much in geometry. Once in a while we will, but most of the time we say we'll go to the what? Midpoint. Right, we'll go to the midpoint. So there's a couple ways to do this. You could do this. You could figure out that whole entire distance, which we already did, we've already mentioned, which is 40 miles. So we don't have to travel all 40 miles, we only have to travel what? Half of that, right, to get to the midpoint. So we don't have to travel 20 miles. 20 miles from where? Well, from either place, right? So what would I have to do to this 10? I would have to, what? Add a 20, wouldn't I? In order to get there. So what mile marker am I? At what mile marker am I? I'm at the 30-mile marker, okay? So I could do that, right? I could have added the 20 to the 10. Or I could have done what to the 50? I could have subtracted 20 because I'm going in the opposite direction, right? So I could have subtracted 20, and I still end up at the 30-mile mark. Make sense? You look at that, it kind of makes sense. It's probably how most people think, but I got a better way to figure out how to find that midpoint than doing all that. Finding the distance and then adding it to one number or subtracting it from the other number. I got a little bit better way. Look at these numbers that we started with. We started with 10, we started with 50, and then what do we end up with as our midpoint? 30. So let's take a look at these two numbers. Let's do a couple steps with this 10 and this 50. Real easy, simple steps in order to get to 30. What do you do with 10 and 50 to get to 30? Anybody? Multiply by 2 and subtract it? Yeah, that would get 20 minus 10 is 30, but that's not going to work every time. If you tried that with all the problems, I don't think that's going to work every time. Actually, I don't know if that would work. It might work every time. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't heard anybody say what I'm going to do yet, because I got a little formula we're going to show you. What'd you say? What'd you say? Okay, he said average. Okay, find the average. Or then he got real fancy with me and he said the mean. Okay, but yeah, what about the average between the two? That puts you right in the middle, doesn't it? If I give you, like in grades, if you have 2 test grades, you want to find what your average is, what are you really finding? You're finding that test grade that's where? Boom, right in the middle, aren't you? So what do you do to find the average? Take the 2 test grades, do what to them? Add them together and divide by 2. Divide by how many numbers you have. So there's 2. So divide by 2. So it's the same thing. Finding the midpoint between 2 points is really the same thing as finding the average. So how do we find the average with 10 and 50? I take 10 plus 50, right? And that seems kind of weird to say plus because we found 40 by subtracting. But we go 10 plus 50, and then we do what with those? Divide it by 2. Does that work? Sure does. 60 divided by 2 is 30. Okay? That'll give you the midpoint every single time. Now, I picked real easy numbers right there. What if I picked a number that wasn't maybe quite so easy to figure out what the midpoint was? Let's just make one up. Let's say negative 17 and positive 49. Okay? Let's say we want to find the midpoint. Right here, we want to find, we'll call it M, point M for midpoint. We wanted to find out where that point actually is located. Alright, so what's the deal with this? What did I just say we do? We take the two endpoints and do what to them? Add them up. So negative 17 plus 49. Then what do we do after we add them up? Divide it by 2. Alright, let's see what we get. So 49 minus 17 is what? 32, is that right? 32 divided by 2 is 16. So where is this point located? It's at the number 16. Ooh, why did that get so small? Let's try it again. Alright, so that's at mile marker, if you want to call it, 16. Yes?
Well, they all divide out evenly.
No. Sometimes they'll come out fractions, sometimes they'll come out ugly. That's alright. Doesn't matter. Okay, you can keep it as a decimal, you can keep it as a fraction. Okay, whatever. If it comes out even, though, keep it even. You know, make sure you reduce it. Don't leave it 32 over 2. Always reduce it. But, yeah, if it comes out as a fraction, but you're dividing by 2, so it's only going to come out to 0.5 anyway, isn't it? Unless these numbers are decimals. These could be decimals, too. So that you could get some funky decimal, and that's okay. I don't care. All right? You could get fractions. Now, here's a rule of thumb. If they give you this as a fraction, I'm just making this up, okay? So, like 3 2/3. And then this is like 7 5/8. Ooh, that would be ugly, wouldn't it? You would skip it. Now. That's crazy talk. All right. So let's get rid of these 17s and all that stuff. Okay. Now, what if we had that? This may come out kind of ugly, but I would not, listen to me. No, this is not where we use a calculator. This is where we rely on our brains and learn how to add fractions together. All right? So first of all, let's do this, okay? No moaning and groaning. All right? This is good stuff. We got to learn how to find add fractions. Let's change this, especially since they're relatively small numbers. Let's change this to improper. I think it's way easier dealing with improper fractions than it is mixed numbers. So let's make them improper. We can do that real quick. What's this going to be? 11, right? Because 9 plus 2 is 11 over 3. And then we're going to add it to this. What's that? 56, 61 over 8. Now, look, I just made those numbers up. I know they're going to come out ugly, but that was the purpose of this. So let's add them together. I like to add sideways. I know you guys like to do things up and down, but in algebra, though, we have a tendency to do things a little more sideways when you add fractions together and that kind of stuff, okay? So watch what I do. I'm actually just going to put one fraction bar instead of splitting them into 2. What's my common denominator with 3 and 8? 24, okay? Now, what do we do to 3? 3 times 8, so 11 times 8 is 88. Now, I may need some help on this one. 8 times what? 3, and then 61 times 3. Oh, that shouldn't be hard. That's 183, right? Is that right? All right, somebody do that for me, the 88 and 183. 24. What's that? 271? Is that right? Okay, 271. All right, over 24. Is that my midpoint? No, it's not. I just added those two things together. Now what do I have to do? Divide it by 2, or, since it's a fraction, do what to it? Multiply it by a half, right? And that's the same thing as dividing by 2? Yeah. So really, I told you this is ugly. What's this going to come out to be? 271 over what? $48. Right. Okay, I can do that in my head. Miriam? Yes, absolutely. Remember when you were a little kid you did this? You went 3 times 8, and then you went 8 times 3, and you did the same thing to the top. I just did that in my head, you know? Because 61 times 3. See, I went 8 times 3 is 24. 61 times 3 is 183. Yeah, times a half. Why did I do that? Because it's midpoint. How do we find the midpoint? We add up the two endpoints and divide it by 2. Find the average. But I don't like to divide with fractions, right? So I multiply by the reciprocal. Instead of dividing by 2, I multiply by a half. It's the same thing as taking half of it. So that's kind of ugly, isn't it? But don't change that to a decimal. All right, keep it like that. That would be your midpoint of that problem. I really doubt you'll have problems even that difficult, okay? Just leave it like that. That's how I would leave it, okay? If you really, really wanted to change it to a mixed number, then you can. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I would leave it like that if I were you, to tell you the truth. All right. So let's figure out a. We kind of did the same thing with distance. Remember, we went left and right, and then we went up and down, and then we went diagonal. We're going to do the same thing with a midpoint. So let's. Same thing would be up and down, right? You can find the midpoint of a vertical line. Just add up the two endpoints, divide it by 2, and you've got your midpoint. All right, so watch this. How much time do I have? Wednesday, 2:20. 5 minutes. Okay, I can do this in 5 minutes. Let's go bright. Let's go yellow. Watch this. I'm just making up a thing. We've got a point here. And I've got a point here. Let's label this. What do you think that? That's like 4 or 5 or something. And this would be, I don't know, negative what? Like 7. And then what? Negative 3 maybe. Just making them up, okay? So what are we going to do this time? We're not finding the distance. We're not doing distance formula. What are we going to do? Find the midpoint, okay? So stop me when you think we're at the midpoint. About right there. Does that look midpoint-ish? Okay. All right, so that's what we're trying to find right there. That's what we want to find. All right, we'll call that X and Y. All right, we're trying to find the midpoint. So if it's diagonal, look, I want to find the midpoint of the X's because watch, the X's would go across here. So how would I find the diagonal of the X's? Good, negative 7 plus 4, and then do what to it? Divided by 2. Good. All right, so I found the midpoint of the X's. That put me right here. Then I want to find the midpoint of the Y's. So let's find the midpoint of the Y's. Now, watch what I'm doing. I'm writing this as a midpoint, right? I'm writing it as a point, an ordered pair. So that's the X part of this. What about the Y part of it? Take the Y's and do what to them? Negative 3 plus 5, and then do what to those? Divide that by 2. Let's see what this comes out to. I don't know if it comes out nice or not. What's that? Negative 3 over 2? That's all right. It can come out to a fraction. We're fine with that. Negative 3 plus 5, that's 2 over 2, which is 1. That's my midpoint right there. That's where that point is located. Now, instead of writing negative 3 over 2, if you wanted to write negative 1.5, that's perfectly fine. Makes a little more sense, doesn't it? So that's where that point is. Look, negative 1.5 to the left, and then what? Up 1. That's where the midpoint's located. And that's how we did that. In this situation, yeah, you have to write it as an ordered pair. As improper or mixed. You know what? I don't really care, to tell you the truth. Okay? Doesn't matter to me. Just look in the back of the book, see what they're writing it as. If they're writing them as improper, keep them improper. If they're writing them as mixed, then change it to a mixed. Okay, that's what I would do. Let me give you a little formula for this. What did we basically just do? Remember we did that x1, y1 stuff yesterday? So look, if we call this x1, y1, what do we call this point up here? x2, y2. So let's come up with our midpoint formula and we'll be done. Midpoint formula. It's an ordered pair, isn't it? It's not just a one-number answer. We're not just finding the distance or the length of this line segment. We're actually finding a point. So our answer is going to look like an ordered pair. Would you agree? So it's going to look like an ordered pair. So what did we do to the x's? I took this x1 and I did what to that x2? I added them together. So it's x1 plus x2. Then what did I do after I added them? Divided by 2, because it's in the middle, right? That's why we divided by 2. And then I did what? I took the y's and I added those together. y1 plus y2. And then I divided it by 2. Bang, there it is. That's the midpoint formula. Remember I said yesterday we're going to kind of come up with our own distance formula? Well, today we came up with our own midpoint formula, didn't we? I mean, it's not our own. This is one that's universally understood, but we kind of came up with it on our own. I didn't just sit here and say, okay, here it is. This is how you do it. Bang, you're done. Go. Right? I kind of went through this process to give you a little bit more appreciation for where that midpoint formula actually came from, and it might make you remember it a little bit better. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to give you a couple points. So give you a point here, plug it in to the midpoint formula, and you're good to go. All right, let me give you a few problems to do. You don't want to go home empty-handed, do you?
Yes.
No. Look, the whole world's hearing you. You should say, Mr. Hamrick, I want education. Give me some problems to do. Nah, this is where you get your education right here, doing problems. You don't get it by listening to me. All right, you get it by doing problems. So it's page 32, and we're doing numbers 33 to 56. Look, you're starting at 33. So what's that? That's 24 problems. That's not that bad. There you go. That's your homework, and that's due tomorrow. Have that ready for tomorrow. Have them both ready, because I'm taking the distance formula problems, and I'm taking the midpoint formula problems. The whole thing. Taking all that tomorrow. So be ready for it.
Taking what? A quiz? Wait, what's tomorrow?
We have a quiz on Monday. Quiz on Monday.